Okay, are you able to see my screen? Perfect. Okay, so thank you for joining me today. I'm going to give a quick overview of Winnipeg Transit's history of zero-emission buses, where we're at, and where we're going. So thank you for joining today. So just some background for Winnipeg Transit. We're considered a medium-sized transit agency in Canada. We have 640 buses, which is still pretty big. We operate three garages, about 30 million kilometers of service each year, 160 to 170,000 rides per day. It's our peak service, and we do most of our work in-house here, including 245 mechanics, as well as our fleet of drivers and employees overall. So we're a pretty big city employer as well. So one of the challenges here with our transition to zero emission bus program is the difference between the corporate city of Winnipeg and Winnipeg, the city. So where this came up originally was looking at, I'll get on the next slide, but the discrepancy between calculating the impact of buses in terms of emissions as our corporate city requirements and then the emissions as a whole in the city of Winnipeg, which includes more than just our corporation. So what this came down to when you look at our climate action plan here at the City of Winnipeg, we didn't do the City of Winnipeg, the corporation, we did the entire City of Winnipeg. So when you look at this, buses make up 0.8% of the total emissions in the city. So it's pretty small when you're looking at the impact of buses overall, with vehicles, both fleet, cars, trucks being the biggest chunk here. But that doesn't tell the entire story. When you look at the emissions for the City of Winnipeg Corporation, buses actually make up almost 40% of the total emissions, with other fleet taking up another 25%. So vehicles overall in the city are a massive impact, and it's entirely within the city's control to be able to manage them and reduce them. So this is one of the reasons why initially cities started looking at buses as a way to reduce emissions. And this varies by city. I've seen buses as high as 78% in some cities. So it entirely depends on your size in terms of what you do and don't insource versus outsourcing. So there are other social benefits indirectly from operating zero emission buses. And even, a slow transition, there's significant compounding of savings from GHG emissions, improved local air quality, reduced environmental damage, reduced respiratory illnesses and cancers in your general population, as well as noise pollution, which is something that is sort of understudied at this point. So we started our zero emission journey back in 2015. This was a technology project that was developed by New Flyer, which is based in Winnipeg. We didn't own these buses, they were leased. We operated them and provided data to New Flyer in this. But what we discovered is that the bus wasn't really the problem. The biggest hurdle was not the technology in individual buses. It's the challenge in how to transform an entire system designed around diesel to a new system of planning, operation, and maintenance based on electric buses and charging. And this has really been the challenge. The bus worked minus 40 to plus 40 wasn't an issue, but our staff just wasn't really prepared for operating this. So at the end of the trial, this was entirely a prototype, so we were going to continue to operate them, but New Flyer decided to take the buses back and had moved in a different direction in terms of where the technology was and just weren't capable of supporting it at this point. So just for some history and background, because I will touch on this, there's three different types of buses that are electric. They're all electric. They all have batteries. The only difference is how they charge. So you have depot charging, which is a traditional sort of plug-in charger at the back of the bus. You have en route charging, which is what you'll see on a street, on a post. The bus will have charge rails on top and connect to the charger. And then hydrogen is also a battery electric bus. It just has an onboard charger, which is a fuel cell. So you fill the bus with hydrogen and it charges as it drives. Essentially, everything else with the bus is identical. So really, the emissions benefits are similar across them. At the tailpipe, at least, it just really comes down to operational differences in terms of how you schedule, plan for, and maintain buses. So what we started with this project was back in 2020. We did a study to really sort of understand what it was going to take to integrate the buses into our fleet. No longer talking pilots, we wanted to look at transitioning the whole fleet. And what we found was that if you're only planning for the bus, you're only planning for 20% of your integration. 20% of your project. The infrastructure is incredibly complicated. There's the size of the equipment, trying to fit that into buildings that weren't designed for it, power requirements, working with your utility. Do you have power? Can you get power? How long is it going to take there? Managing energy. Everybody has to suddenly learn how their utility bills work in a new way, because that can be very different in terms of how you plan for and charge these. And then resiliency, which I'll touch on a bit later. But basically, we have diesel generators that run a building. They're not really designed for charging a vehicle. So that adds extra complexity in a changing world right now. But the thing that even we didn't get out of this study, now that we're starting to integrate the bus, is the labor transition. And change management and getting your people ready for this was really something that it's difficult to plan for until the buses get here. So this is a very cluttered slide, I know, but it was a quick way to sort of visualize the differences between the technology in terms of trade-offs that your organization will have to look at when trying to pick which to look at. So they all have differences in cost, the cost of the vehicle, as well as the cost of fuel, which impacts how you operate it. The infrastructure that you need to utilize that's a per bus basis and a initial launch. So that's the difference between a pilot versus a full-scale transition, and then resiliency cost and whatnot. So there are pros and cons with each bus type, and it will depend on your very specific operational requirements. And that can be capital cost, it can be operating cost, and it can be operational convenience are really the three trade-offs that you have to kind of look at and evaluate across your fleet. So hydrogen, if you look at paper, hydrogen seems like a fantastic solution. It's a drop-in replacement for diesel when you look at it. The challenge is there is no commercial hydrogen in Canada right now. The hydrogen is coming, and it's been available in industrial grade, but industrial grade doesn't work with a fuel cell bus. It requires a very clean type of hydrogen, and that's been a little bit limited. So it's probably coming in 28 to 2030, but the hydrogen that's available today becomes quite expensive when you have to transport it, and there's very limited quantities right now. So there's a lot that's starting to develop here, but it's just something to consider where you are and your access to hydrogen if you start looking at that technology. So what we ended up with here, and this is our slow transition shown here. We didn't do just one transition. We've looked at about 5 different transition plans, depending on what kind of capital becomes available in the future. But we mapped out sort of the pros and cons of each vehicle, and have settled more or less on a target right now prior to our pilot of about 70% battery electric long-range buses and 20% fuel cell buses. This changes based on vehicle type, but basically we have planned and mapped out our transition over the next 3 years, including a short-term pause for diesel potentially because of funding right now. So the other thing that we had to add to this project was our climate risk assessment, which was something new. There's a lot more climate vulnerabilities with zero-emission vehicles. We looked at both our infrastructure and the buses themselves in terms of their resiliency to flooding being one thing, which ultimately was not really an issue. But in terms of our infrastructure planning, we did make some design changes related to heat, drought, flooding, tornado, wind, freezing rain, lightning. These all came into play in decisions we made in terms of where we located our chargers, some design features, and extra wind resilience or lightning rods we had to add to our hydrogen station. But this also came part of our planning as well for infrastructure. So we have 3 buildings, one of which is a new construction. The other 2 are going to be retrofits. But fuel cells actually became part of our resiliency strategy. So if we were to design our vehicles or garages entirely for battery electric vehicles, it's a huge power requirement. And if you had a power outage, you either have to spend huge amounts on battery systems for backup storage, generators, and whatnot. So we actually looked at distributing fuel cell buses across our 2 bigger garages, and that provided us the backup if there's a power outage that the hydrogen station can easily operate on a generator. And we have minimum red level service if there was ever a massive power outage in the city that we're able to maintain transit service regardless of that. So it simplifies the power demand that we need from Manitoba Hydro, simplifies backup power, and minimizes operating impact in a major outage. And overall, this helps simplify our planning for emergency backup systems. So back to the original story on the study back in 2020. Again, this is 2020 dollars, so dollars were completely different than what they are today. But what we found was without funding, there's very little business case for electric vehicles. They are more expensive. You have to buy charging equipment or hydrogen equipment, and all of that adds cost. And even some of the things like charging, the lifespan of them is similar to the bus. So you may always be buying a bus and a charger. So it's not like a older infrastructure project that you'd put in for 50 years. This is something that's potentially a continual cost. So you were getting maintenance savings, but what we are finding is that you have less maintenance, but more people are involved in it for safety. So there might not be savings there. There's definitely savings on the operating side, but you have to manage it in order to achieve that. So early pilots that didn't really understand how their utility fees worked were ending up that they were actually paying more for an electric vehicle than for a diesel. So now with knowledge, that's starting to come down, but it's something you really have to organize and plan for. They aren't just immediately cheaper. But with funding, which we were able to get funding through the Investing in Canada infrastructure program, you see that the cost definitely at least broke even over an 18-year period, and in some cases is potentially cheaper. So if your goal is to come in here and make massive savings on electric vehicles, that's probably not going to happen. But if your goal is climate change, there is definitely a business case for the vehicles. So since this program started in 2020, the price of a diesel bus has gone up from about $500,000 to well over $1 million. Electric buses have actually been a little bit more price stable, but even those have gone up from about 1.2 million to 1.6 or 7 million. There's just been unprecedented inflation since then. And part of the problem that we have with our city processes is we have to cost our project before we apply for funding. We applied for funding in early 2021. We had issues getting agreement between the province and the city and the feds, and the funding wasn't approved for almost 18 months after we applied. And then finally awarded the buses in 2022. And during that time, the price of a bus had jumped 25 to 30%. So, and ever since then, prices have still been going up 4 to 6% annually, when our entire budget was based on a 3% annual inflation that was common before COVID. So all of this has resulted in purchasing power, cutting scope of projects, and overall reduced benefits from the project. So we've managed to keep our electric buses as close to the target. So we had originally planned for 100. We're targeting right now about 90 to 92 buses. But some of our infrastructure had to be cut back and trimmed in order to stay within the budget. So we have started receiving our first buses and are scaling up. They are going into service. They started service in August. We have bought one of every type of bus that's available, 40-foot and 60-foot fuel cell and battery electric. We're planning to do a head-to-head trial over these for the next year or two, and beyond, I guess, at this point, and validating their performance over a full calendar year. So battery electric buses, we kind of understand how they work from our trial. Technology's changed a bit, but not a lot. Fuel cell buses are almost entirely new in Canada right now. There's only 2 that are operating and have had challenges with fuel supply over the last year. So really, this is going to be one of the leading projects when it comes to both 60 foots and winter consumption and fuel cell buses. Oops, sorry. Um, we're also looking at the operating challenges and on the people side, like what does it take to actually fuel them, to charge them? What does it mean for our labor force and whatnot? And sort of looking at just the operational challenges, not just the technical challenges of the bus. And we wanted to look at both types of buses, both size of buses, just so that we aren't continually doing pilot after pilot. This is really a transition, and this is the data that we need to plan our transition going forward. We wanted to get all the pain points as early as possible so that we can scale quicker after this. So organizational change management has been one of the challenges here. We did map out all of the impacts for each department. and identified some of the risks and opportunities. But one of the challenges that we had here is that we didn't get funding for new positions, so everybody has been doing this work off the side of their desk. And a lot of the planning didn't really become a priority until the buses were here. So despite having a 2-year lead time to try to get these buses, it wasn't until the buses started showing up, and we were getting a push to get them into service that we actually got staff to prioritize and put these in. So this has been a challenge. Some teams have been better than others, but overall, this is something that we're now recommending to anyone that's getting into electric buses to really focus on the people side of the impact and not just the technology side. There is a significant amount of training and rework that needs to be done for staff, overcoming fear factors with the buses. Understanding why we're doing it is also a thing that's important to let people know. And then there's going to be all kinds of software and things that are coming. So you can start without it, but it's something that you're going to need. So you need to work with your IT department to ensure you understand that. And then the other thing that's new here is data collection and reporting. There's all kinds of data on these vehicles. Nobody really knows what to do with them. So we're trying to figure out how to best use this and how we can use this to our advantage on planning going forward. So just some quick sort of summaries here as we get into as close to the end here. Just wanting to understand that transitioning your fleet is not going to be a straight line. There's supply chain disruptions on the bus side, on the infrastructure side. Costs are escalating, market uncertainty, companies are coming and going. There's a lot of political pressure to either get into this or out of this. And sometimes you have to make decisions that are better in the short term, but may not be the best overall. So the perfect is the enemy of the good is one thing that you may have to consider. If here the benefit is to try to get beyond diesel and lower emissions, maybe you're not getting the perfect zero emission out of the bat, but it's something that you have to do to get your project going and get to where you need to go. And then managing risk is something that's always going to be important, and there's always going to be unforeseen challenges. But we need to start focusing on our successes and not just the problems that we see here, and learning from others to see what's working and what's not working. And change is incredibly difficult. No matter how much you have from your support you have from your organization now, at some point you will run into the resistance. This typically comes up when something goes wrong, prices go up, there's a challenge, but you'll equally face this by why aren't you going faster and why are we even doing this at all? So it's important to understand and communicate the business case for why you got into this and what your outcomes are so that you're able to pivot either way when these challenges come up. And some key takeaways that the technology's come away, but it's still evolving. Don't expect the buses or any zero emission vehicle to be a drop-in replacement for whatever you're replacing it. It's not. It might, even if it has the same range, it doesn't operate the same way. Things will have to change in your organization. Planning is needed to ensure that savings are realized and that you're getting the most out of your project. And this is a transition that doesn't impact just vehicles, it impacts your entire organization. So learning to understand the pain points within your operations and take time to plan will help your project overall be successful. And that is it for today, and I welcome any questions you may have.